Welcome to the Trade Commissioner Service webinar on working with the U.S. Customs Broker. I'm Linda Soltis, a Trade Commissioner with the Consulate General of Canada in New York, based in Buffalo and upstate New York, a key border region that welcomes Canadian trade. I'm speaking to you from the ancestral lands of the Seneca and other Indigenous peoples who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Before we launch into the customs brokers discussion, I would like to introduce my in-country colleague, Kurt DeVries, who will explain the role of the Trade Commissioner Service. Over to you, Kurt.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Linda. My name is Kurt DeVries, and I am Linda's counterpart based in Canada in Toronto, Ontario. And it's always a pleasure to do these things together. I'm part of a government department that has been around for about 130 years. And we are in 162 places around the world, and we're organized into sectors to help Canada's economy grow. And we do this by working and facilitating trade relations, which is really buyer meets seller. And we do it through investment, helping investment come in the country or helping Canadian investment go out, as long as there's a revenue stream coming in. We work on partnerships, which typically tend to be with our university ecosystem and international industrial players. These are very wide baskets. These are very broad, but really to look at the granular level of our service, we can do really 5 baskets. We prepare companies to go overseas in markets that they haven't been to before. We assess them. We assess them from their potential to deliver their product or good or service to the market, and if there actually is a demand for what they have in the market. We provide opportunities or qualified contacts. And this is typically why most people want to know us or want to know me, is they want the network. And we have a very deep domestic network in Canada, which goes in all sorts of directions and many supply chains, because we are client facing. Like Linda and I, we work for the government, but quite often we're immersed in the private sector, like 24/7, very many times per year. And that's kind of a unique role. The fourth service we do is called problem solving. Again, it's a very general basket. Clients will email or call with all sorts of problems they might have. We can't officially get involved as a government in Canada, but we sit on your side of the table and we give you counsel or leads or support that you might need to help solve the problem. And quite often, many of us have been working on our jobs for 10, 20 plus years. So we've seen quite a few precedents go by, and often we can add a fair amount of commentary or value to those conversations. And we have something called additional service, which really means that we can be a jack of all trades, so to speak. We can do a lot of things to try to help you. And if we can't help you, we try to refer you to the right people that can. I see next slide here. We increase our ability to succeed in international markets. So yeah, great. Now, my role, I am part of the domestic network, which on this slide in the circle is the TCS Regional Office Network. And there's a few regional offices across the country. We have an office in every major province and region in Canada. So Ontario, Toronto is our main office for the RO in Ontario region. It's the largest team. We have one in Montreal, Quebec. We have some out east. We have some in the center of Canada, out west, and even up north into the territories. So we are here to help Canadian exporters prepare for markets. We assess what they have. We are the first point of contact to help our clients get abroad and meet people and colleagues like Linda, who are spread at our 160 places around the world. In a way, I'm a gatekeeper. I have to prioritize our network and our bandwidth to help us get the greatest amount of success. We have KPIs. I'll break it into like an Olympic analogy, bronze, silver, gold. Our bronze is how many qualified contacts or opportunities we bring our clients. That's kind of a self-attestation. The client will agree that this person's relevant. And, that's our first kind of bronze medal, is how many of those we can feed our clients. The second is providing some evidence that theory or that these were actually relevant. And typically if there's like legal work done, quotes exchange, NDAs, MOUs, significant technical exchanges, discussions. We consider that like a silver medal or an opportunity pursued. And it helps us justify to our bosses in Ottawa that yes, our theory was correct, the alignment was correct. And then the gold medal is obviously the sale. And we try to track the sale, how big was the sale. Our gold medal still is the same size if it's a $10 million sale or a $100,000 sale. It doesn't really matter to us, but we do track it and we want to know. So for Linda and I, we try to find ways to prioritize our time on clients that succeed. So to work with us, best to be prepared, and us colleagues at the regional office in Toronto are very happy to help you prepare, either directly through sessions with us or through partners in the field. Yeah, next slide. CUSMA compliance. So big topic these days. Yeah, I'll avoid any comedic comments because it's not funny for everybody. It's a very serious matter, and we have a 1833 number set up and a link that you can learn more about CUSMA compliance. I would say my observation around the first time we went back to the drawing board on this agreement, there was a lot of concern about the rigor of CUSMA. Was it worth it? In my sector, I do automotive, so I'm 100% focused on automotive companies. The OEMs and the tier ones could easily comply because they had the bandwidth. The tier twos and threes were iffy because there's a lot of paperwork involved. And so a lot of them chose the MFN, most favored nation basis to perform their trade, which is 2.5%. Now, that's been changed quite a bit. The penalty for not using CUSMA is much higher, so there's a big incentive to actually comply. I advise everybody to take a look at it because the provisions under CUSMA are very modern and very open. But the disclaimer is the paperwork can be quite arduous. So that's something we set up to help you. I hope that you can use it. Linda, did you want to cover anything else, or did I do my job as your partner in Ontario?
I think you did the job.
Okay. Maybe one quick note before I pass it off to you. We do have an export funding program called Can Export, and you can Google that, like Can Canada, I can do this, CAN, and export. And pretty much the first link you'll find is the program. And this is it's a set reimbursement up to 50% of a approved project for you to diversify your markets. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And Linda's going to get in a lot more detail with with some of our partners and contacts on the ground in New York State and all of the trials and tribulations. There's a lot of cases coming in, a lot of reactive work on, hey, someone's trying to get me to put a bond up for these tariffs, and there's so much activity. But I'm going to pass it on to you, Linda, because I know you're going to have a lot to say about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Kurt. As you've heard, the Trade Commissioner Service assists you in Canada and abroad. So let's talk Canada-US. Our trade relationship approaches $1 trillion, and that has grown significantly since CUSMA. It was severely tested during COVID, and it was an unsung success story. 2025 brought new challenges, which brings us to this discussion. Customs brokers are key to the export process, and you're about to meet three of the best. First, we'll have a question and answer with two customs brokers, Damon Piatek of Piatek Customs and Jim Trubitz of Mohawk Global. After that, Brian Barber, President of the Northern Border Customs Brokers Association and VP of U.S. Brokerage and Government Affairs at Wilson International, will share insights from his leadership vantage point. In this discussion, we have decades of experience, and I think it's approaching like 100 years. These three have helped thousands of Canadian exporters, and I am blessed to work with them. I'd like to ask our speakers to first introduce themselves and their companies, beginning with Damon, then Jim, then Brian. Damon?
Damon Piatek, President and CEO of Piatek Customs and Logistics. I'm a licensed U.S. customs broker, and I've been in the international trade and logistics industry for approximately 30 years. Been working with a lot of companies out of Canada, but we also do entries from any country in the world into the U.S. at all 328 ports.
Hi,
Jim?
Jim Trubitz with Mohawk Global, Vice President of Business Development over here. Have over 40 years of experience on the border, plus courier and air and ocean as well. So go ahead, Brian, take it from there. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Jim. So I'm Brian Barber with Wilson International. So firstly, we're a full-service Canadian and U.S. licensed customs broker with deep roots along the Can-Am border. Our corporate headquarters is in Mississauga, Ontario. I'm based in Buffalo, New York. And throughout my years at Wilson, I've held a series of progressing operational and regulatory roles. Currently serving as Linda mentioned, our Vice President of U.S. Brokerage Operations and Government Affairs. I, as well, am a licensed customs broker and certified customs specialist, both in Canada and the U.S. I'm the corporate license qualifier for my organization, and I'm responsible for all of our regulatory policies, compliance, industry representation, and government relations. Linda also mentioned that I'm currently serving my second term as the president of the Northern Border Customs Brokers Association. So we have members spanning the entire Can-Am border, as we like to say, from Maine to Blaine. And our membership specializes in the land border environment where volume and velocity count the most. Just additional industry participation, I'm a board member for the National Customs Brokers and Forwarders Association of America, where I also represent the Northern Border. I'm also serving my second appointed term to the Commercial Customs Operations Advisory Committee, or the COAC, where I lead a couple of working groups, including broker modernization and also modernized entry processing. So thank you for allowing me to be here today.
Thank you, Brian, and we look forward to your commentary to close our session. So now we move on to the questions. I will ask Jim and Damon to answer each question in alternating order. So our first question: when and why should a Canadian exporter work with a U.S. customs broker? Jim, can you kick us off?
Sure. So we have a concept in the United States when importing, and that's called reasonable care. And U.S. Customs has actually named several experts in that. One of them would be a U.S. broker, another one would be a U.S. Customs attorney, or a U.S. accountant. So let's say that you work with your Canadian broker for guidance. Customs would not perceive that as demonstrating reasonable care. So it's very important that you work with a licensed broker in the United States to make sure you're exercising your reasonable care and you're meeting your compliance obligations with the U.S. Customs.
Yeah, and you're going to want to get engaged with a broker, a U.S. customs broker, as soon as possible. As soon as you think you're going to export to the United States, you want to engage with somebody to get the right compliance steps, to understand what you're responsible for as a Canadian company, and then to help make some business decisions. You know, in the U.S., you can act as a non-resident importer as a Canadian company, and you could take some of that burden away from your companies that you're selling to, your customers in the United States. So the earlier you get a customs broker involved, the better off you are.
Okay. When selecting a broker, what kind of questions should a Canadian exporter ask? And can you share examples from your Canadian client base? Damon?
Sure. So I always like to say that there's two different types of customs brokers in the industry. There's transactional-based customs brokers, and then there's operational-based customs brokers. Your transactional customs brokers are just going to be pushing paper and making sure that the entry's filed, and they're not going to take any, they're not going to give you any assistance. And that'll be a fit for some companies, but for most small to medium-sized businesses, you're really going to want an operational-based customs broker that's going to be part of your organization, that's going to become an extension of your team. What you're really looking to ask is, when I call in, who am I talking to? Are you talking to a customer service rep, or do you actually have access to a licensed U.S. customs broker? That's what you want to ask. You want to be able to have access to the experts, not just customer service people.
Damon, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that I always tell a Canadian company that's looking to enter this market is, does that broker you're working with have that expertise? in that product line as well. Because let's face it, if you're great with steel, but you don't really know anything about textiles, that could cause problems for that poor party that's just trying to get into that market. And one of my favorite success stories is actually a company out of Toronto that they thought their goods qualified under CUSMA or USMCA for textile. Turned out that none of the product did because it was all foreign fabric. So we actually worked with Linda and her group and DFATE in Ottawa, and it actually was able to get them a TPL certificate, and they were able to bring the stuff in duty free. So you have to be precise when that, and only by talking with a licensed broker was that possible. I don't think that would have happened at the desk level. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, you really have to understand the product, and that's where the conversation comes in. We just had a customer come on board that was importing oat milk into the United States and used 3 other customs brokers. Each time they got rejected at the border, and what was happening was the brokers were not telling them about the organic certifications that were needed to bring it across certain FDA requirements with FSVP. So you're really going to need, I can't stress it enough, you need to work with somebody who's going to be part of your team that's going to help you understand the regulations, because oat milk and steel and textiles, very different regulations. You have to understand them all. So
I just want to build on that too. Every one of these scenarios that we talk about when you're talking with that exporter is unique, and you have to be asking questions and drawing that information out of them. You know what I mean?
You have to know what questions to ask, and you got to know where to start. And every product, whatever it is different, and it's not necessarily just the customs aspect of it that gets murky. It's the other government agencies that are involved: FDA, DOT, EPA, steel. It's a maze of information that you really have to have a partner with.
Yep.
One question: can you quickly explain, Jim, what the tariff preference level is?
Sure. So with every one of these free trade agreements, just not even CUSMA, USMCA, but other free trade agreements as well, they recognize a lot of this man-made fiber and sometimes wool fibers are not available in one of those free trade countries. So they allow a certain level of stuff to be brought in and made with it, provided the quota's not filled, for one, and you have the proper documentation.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we discuss the actual export process, let's level set and talk CUSMA or USMCA, because it is integral to most export scenarios. CUSMA was a much needed update of 1993 NAFTA. It went into effect July 2020, so we're actually having 5th anniversary. And it was a product of the first Trump administration. This question, this is a 2-part. I'm going to read a couple different questions before I ask you to answer. What is CUSMA's status, and can you describe the range of products it covers? What benefit do you receive for qualifying goods under CUSMA?
Okay, so CUSMA is very important because and I think Kurt said it best right now. There's so many companies that weren't really taking advantage of it because maybe they only had to pay 2.5% duty, but now it's become a greater issue, a greater concern, and a lot of companies now are saying, I have to look and see if my goods qualify for this free trade agreement. So Linda, this free trade agreement is going to eliminate duties and something called a merchandise processing fee that we're going to see at the border. That was what always intended to do. Now, because of the Trump tariffs under IEEPA, which we would also known as the drug tariff, and the reciprocal tariff of 10%, those can be eliminated by qualifying your goods under the CUSMA USMCA.
Okay.
I have to say something here, and this is really, really important. The auto tariffs and the metal tariffs still apply. So you could be excluded from You could qualify your goods under CUSMA USMCA, but still be facing additional duties under the auto tariffs or the metal tariffs.
Mhm.
Okay, then the next question I'm going to ask you specifically about what tariffs apply, but Damon, could you follow up on Jim's answer to the products that CUSMA covers, how broad you think it is?
Sure. So CUSMA or USMCA is available for any product that's made in Canada, United States, and Mexico. So the tariff is broken up into 97 chapters, 1 through 97, and every product that's in there is eligible for treatment under this trade agreement. You just have to meet either the tariff shift, the regional value content, or the substantial manipulation or substantial transformation of the product into a new product in one of those countries, or a combination of them both. And with the auto parts and autos, there's some additional regulations in there with minimum wage standards and a couple other things that if you're not in the auto industry, it's not worth going into. But it's not a difficult task to understand how CUSMA will affect your products, and it's not a difficult task to apply for CUSMA. It's simply doing your due diligence, understanding where your product is classified, well, getting your product classified properly first, and then understanding how the product qualifies for treatment under the free trade. And it's basically keeping the documentation to prove what you're claiming. And then you have to do that, you update it once a year. But it's a very simple process, and a customs broker, a licensed U.S. customs broker, can help you out with that, no problem.
So CUSMA applies to many different products.
Yeah. Yep.
So what tariffs are in effect right now outside the scope of CUSMA? We hear the terms a lot, and you've referenced them: IEEPA, reciprocal tariffs, 232s, automotive, 301 tariffs. Can you define these for us?
Sure. So your 232 tariffs are going to include anything that's made out of steel and aluminum, and that also includes the auto and the auto parts. There's lists out there for all of these tariffs. A big thing that you need to do is, if you are trading with the U.S. or exporting to the U.S., sign up with the CSMS messages through CBP. They're going to give you the first line of information on all of these updates. All of the lists are going to be available there through the CSMS messages. Talk to your customs broker, but to understand what applies to you, that's your best source of information. Your IEEPA is like Jim said previously, is the Emergency Powers Act, and then your 301 duties, those are specifically for China and Chinese goods. And that was, I think, back to a trade agreement in 1962, if I'm not mistaken. But those are enacted under, the Trump administration is pulling these out of the woodwork, and they've been dormant for a long time. But that's the powers that he's using from these older trade acts that he can use. So 301 is China, 232 is steel and aluminum, and there's separate lists for different products of either primary forms, or now just recently, or before we got on, Jim was talking about it, we have the addition that just came this past, I think it was Friday or late last week, of the appliances under the 232 tariffs.
Jim, can I ask you to talk about IEEPA a bit more?
Sure. So IEEPA is the fentanyl tariff, and it actually applies to 3 countries. These were the ones that were singled out by the White House. One of them, of course, was China, and that one that is leveled off at 20% right now. It was 10, and then they added another 10 to it. Canada and Mexico were also going to be subject to IEEPA, which is that fentanyl or drug tariff, as it's referred to. That's at 25%. But if your goods qualify for CUSMA or USMCA, it's deferred. There is nothing on that. When it comes to the 232 for the metal tariffs, the aluminum and steel, Presently, those are at 50%. And so this is where I'm sure Damon's going to echo this as well. We're spending more time talking probably about the metal tariffs than anything else, because if their goods qualify for CUSMA, but they're subject to the metal tariffs, there's all types of questions and all types of layers, and it's based on documentation. So what do I mean by that? If we have aluminum or steel and we have a mill test report and it shows that the melt or smelt or the pour was done in the United States, Damon and I as a broker are going to bring these goods in and not be subject to the 50%. So one of the things that was really interesting, Linda, is back in 2018, we had steel articles and aluminum articles. And then we had some derivatives. Derivatives are derived from. There was only 21 items. We're over 465 items now. So it's very important. And I guess I have one more point on this that's really important, and that's aluminum. So now we just got a message from Customs back about a week ago, and it's going to go into effect on this Saturday, where if something's made out of aluminum, right, let's say this bottle, and you cannot prove the origin of the aluminum, then we're going to have to assess it at 200% duty. So it's very important that documents are able to be provided and that people have done their due diligence before they ship.
See, it's all about knowing your supply chain, knowing where you're purchasing your products from. And on the 232 tariffs, outside of knowing the country of origin of the smelt, UK is currently at 0%. So UK dodged a bullet on that. They've been negotiating, I think, a little bit harder than most other countries with the US. So we'll see that trade agreement here in the next following couple of weeks that's going to come out of the negotiations. But Europe did, or England did pull out of that with the 232 duties. They're avoiding the 50%.
I just want to say a certain clarification. I believe that the UK didn't get completely out of it. I think they got knocked down to 25, or they kept them at 25. They didn't have to go all the way to 50.
Okay.
You know.
So, I'm going to return to the export scenario. Let's say that a product qualifies for CUSMA, and what we've heard is that many do. It's a very robust agreement that is still in force. When goods cross the border, documentation is needed to prove it qualifies for CUSMA. Can you walk us through the data points, starting with the tariff number and things like rule of origin and the other data that is needed to prove CUSMA compliance?
Sure. Damon said this already, and when it comes to tariff classification, that is the most important thing, because it's going to drive all types of information. One, it's going to drive what rule of origin you have to look up in that free trade agreement. Number one, and so I remember I did a presentation once, and I said, how many of you are taking advantage of NAFTA? Everybody raised their hand. And then I said, how many of you know your tariff number? About half the room knew their tariff number. So that just tells you that that's putting everybody at risk without knowing their tariff number.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, and Damon's going to agree with me on this one, a lot of times we'll think we have the right tariff number, and then we'll look in customs system under cross and find that customs changed their mind. So it's very important that that's that first key step. Go ahead, Damon. I know you want to say something here.
Yeah, when we do an audit on eligibility for CUSMA or USMCA, what we do is we try to get a bill of material for the product, country of origin, all the parts, value of all the parts, the inputs, and then from there we do a tariff validation. because when we do a lot of audits, we're looking at somewhere industry standard is about, when I do an audit, I'm finding somewhere between 60 to 65% error rate on tariff numbers. There's a couple reasons behind that. Part of it is you're not asking the right advice. Somebody somewhere is giving you a tariff number within 5 minutes. That doesn't happen. There's research that's involved. And then, or you're going to Google and getting your tariff number and you're basing it off of duty rates. And that's what we see the errors coming from. But it's really, you got to have understanding about all the inputs that are going into your product, what the manufacturing process is, and then the tariff number at the end. And then that gives us the basis on how we qualify the goods for CUSMA, USMCA.
And you know, you bring up the important thing about that bill of materials. Bill of materials is that one aspect. The second part of it is the supporting documents. And how many times have we seen it where someone used to source from this supplier, but they change suppliers and find out now that those goods aren't even North American origin. They're not made in Mexico, Canada, US, and now they could be risking their whole free trade program.
Yeah, and I went through a mitigation of a fine with a company out of Canada that was drawing steel rod into wire and galvanizing it, and they thought because of the manipulation that they did, the transformation from rod to wire and galvanizing it was enough to qualify for NAFTA at the time. It wasn't. It still remained steel. It was in the same form. It was just drawn out, made smaller diameter. So when they switched their production, they got their steel rod from Stelco in Canada, which was made it NAFTA eligible. They changed to Moldova for the rod, and it knocked them out of NAFTA eligibility. They were faced with a $140,000 penalty on about 25 shipments. So we were able to mitigate it down to about $25,000. But to your point, Jim, you got to understand what your inputs are, what you're doing, and keep a handle on it, because the slightest little change can change your eligibility for the trade agreement.
And one more point on this too, and this comes down to that documentation. It's just not at the end of the year taking out that free trade declaration for under CUSMA USMCA and changing the date on it and signing it again. U.S. Customs believes you have this nice, neat folder with the bill of material and all the supporting documents in it.
Yeah, and they will ask for it. If they ask for documentation of your eligibility for the trade agreement, you have to be able to produce it in a reasonable amount of time. Sometimes we're able to get extensions on it, but when they send you a 28, a request for information, a CF-28, which is a request for information from Customs, they're looking for an answer within 30 days. And sometimes it's not feasible to get all the requested documentation in 30 days, but you should already have it on hand, so you should be able to supply it to them the next day.
That kind of leads into that next point. And how long do you have to have those documents for? 5 years, right? So
Well, I'm going to jump in here because that's the next question. Can you break down the company's responsibility for CUSMA documentation versus the role of the customs broker?
Mm-hmm.
What does the company need to do and collect?
So a customs broker is like an accountant. You give us the information and we're responsible for transmitting it to customs accurately and true and in reasonable time. We don't have the responsibility of maintaining all of these records. We will keep a copy of a NAFTA certificate or CUSMA or USMCA certificate on file for the company, but we don't keep the supporting documentation. That's your responsibility. So you should be either sending a blanket NAFTA certificate to your customs broker on a yearly basis, and then if there's any changes, updating your customs broker, or you should be sending a certificate with each individual transaction that's being processed at the border. And then you have to maintain those documents for 5 years, like Jim said.
Jim, do you want to build on that?
So if for some reason we receive a blanket declaration, and I had just one of these last week, it showed Taiwan for a country of origin and Brazil as a country of origin. Those are not part of the parties that are allowed under this free trade agreement. It either has to be Mexico, Canada, or US. So if we see something like that, you know, we're going to reject it on face value.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it's really up to the exporter / non-resident importer to make sure that's properly prepared. Damon, if someone sends you a USMCA declaration or a customs deck and asks you to look at it, probably within 30 seconds, you're going to be able to look and see if it looks sufficient or not.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's requirements in there for country of origin, tariff classification, you know, how it qualifies, and you know, we're going to see those discrepancies. They're going to pop out at us right away, like Jim said, with country of origin, or if they're claiming the wrong method of qualification, or you know, there's
Yep.
they pop out at us right away. It's not just filling out a form that's going to get you to qualify. It's the due diligence. It's doing all the paperwork. That's the effort, and making sure you understand how your part qualifies. I wish there was an easy way to say this is how your part qualifies, but it's really based on the tariff classification of your part, and then from there we can dig in to see how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding is the agreement allows for some nuances, meaning significant transformation. Can you all talk about that? Some of the give an example of where you've helped the company by doing some due diligence.
Jim, you want to take that?
Yep, sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I liked about this free trade agreement is they relaxed out a lot of the rules of origin. And one of the things they did actually too is, if there's a lot of companies that didn't qualify their goods under NAFTA, but they actually now qualify them under the USMCA. And some of those are chemicals because they had different reaction rules they allowed. I had someone that was making snow blowers up in Canada. That snow thrower up in Canada used to have to meet a regional value content rule. Now it was a simple tariff shift rule. So sometimes people say, oh, no, we didn't qualify under NAFTA. And I'm like, hey, you might want to look at these rules of origin. They're a lot user-friendly.
You need to double check. If you weren't qualifying for NAFTA previously, definitely look at what the CUSMA requirements are for your product. I wish they would have just named it one name, because then I wouldn't have to be confused for the rest of my life here. Is it CUSMA? Is it USMCA? And Mexico calls it something different. But really what it breaks down to is, like we were talking about with the steel, if the substantial transformation is based on customs definition, and it's based on tariff classification. So it may say meets a tariff shift from any other chapter except. There's all these exclusions. So you really need to understand, and I hate to sound like a broken record and go back to it, but you need to understand what the tariff number is to begin with of the product that you're going to be shipping to the United States, because everything else hinges on the proper tariff classification of it. And it has to be the proper tariff classification to go there. And if I can just kind of sidetrack a little bit, I've heard a lot about tariff engineering lately, and tariff engineering is a dangerous game to get into with U.S. Customs. I'm not keen on it. Companies do it. There are some successes in tariff engineering, but there's more failures than there are successes. Ford Motor Company was one of the biggest failures. They paid the largest penalty in recent history on cargo vans for tariff engineering. So, yeah, be careful with the tariff engineering. If somebody says they could change your tariff number to pay less, be leery of it.
I had a conversation with someone in the enforcement side of customs, and they said that if they notice that you've been using one tariff number forever and then all of a sudden it changes, or you've never used this tariff number before and all of a sudden you are, they are getting flagged into someone's inbox to look at this.
Yeah.
So you know, sure, you can change it. And let's say that you've been classifying this as a hand tool and you didn't realize that there was a provision for staplers. You're going to be on firm ground, but you need to do your due diligence, and you really should be working with someone, Damon. Yeah. You know, this is not some shameless plug. It's for their own benefit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and there's you have to be able to talk to licensed individuals like Jim and myself and Brian that actually hold the knowledge. Sales reps, customer service reps, they're just not going to cut it in this industry. They don't hold the knowledge and expertise. And Jim, what's the pass rate on the exam now? Is it like 10%, somewhere around there?
It was 7 when I took it.
Yeah. It's low.
I saw a pop-up just come in, and I have a story to tell. I have someone that just did something with Chat GPT yesterday, and they sent me their stuff and said, our goods are subject to 50% duty. And I wrote back and I said, all your products are made out of steel, and this tariff number only applies to aluminum. You're outside the 50%. And your goods qualify under CUSMA, so you can bring these in duty free. And so it's ChatGPT is not as reliable as Customs Cross System, which is the ruling search engine, or going for a binding ruling.
Yeah.
And
I would definitely be leery of the AI and use for customs regulations. I'm a big user of AI. I use Copilot all the time. They're not paying me to say that, but AI with tariff classification, it's not there. There's a lot of companies. I've done some consulting for companies that are trying to get it there. Problem is, it's just so complex. You need the human touch in there. You need somebody with years of experience like Jim. It's really there's a science to it, but there's also an art to it. So.
Okay, so we've heard that CUSMA, a lot of things still apply. We know that documentation is needed. So the exporter needs to organize and collect CUSMA documentation, keep it for 5 years, but it needs to be organized in a consistent way. Is there a best practice to organize CUSMA documentation from an exporter standpoint? What department should manage it? Can you share some best practices you've seen inside some of your client companies?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to do it is to have your overall, if you want like an order of it, it's holding your general CUSMA certificate. And then behind that, you have each individual product with its packet of the due diligence, which is the breakdown of all the parts, the substantiation of that. So where are you buying it from? Who are your suppliers? Receipts, sales agreements. And then if you're buying something from a CUSMA eligible or USMCA eligible country, then you're a supplier, then you're going to want to back that up with certificates direct from your suppliers. And then from there, it's just all your due diligence and keeping all that paperwork and then keeping track of it. As far as the department that should be in charge of that, I always look at, customs as compliance, not logistics. I don't think this is a logistics, we're not part of logistics. We're part of compliance, which should be housed in a separate division. You shouldn't be handling the logistics shipping guy that does import, the shipping papers is not the person that's going to be taking care of it. You need somebody in compliance.
I can add to that. Last November, Customs issued a CSM message. This is their notice board. And what they basically said last year was the party that's completing that USMCA or CUSMA declaration should have knowledge. So it may be different in every company that you work for, but Customs is going to reach out to that person because that's the person who completed this form, but also they want that person to have knowledge. So if someone in the logistics department doesn't know about the purchasing and the assembly and the transformation, then they should not be that party signing that declaration. It should be someone that actually does have that knowledge.
Okay. In the interest of time, I'm going to cut to this question because we have like 2 or 3 minutes left. Can you share the mistakes you see most often made by Canadian exporters?
Okay. Obviously, this is not in any set order, but we're seeing a lot with misclassification, of course, poor documentation, incorrect free trade agreement application, but in valuation. But now probably the biggest one we're seeing is not providing that breakout by value and by weight for aluminum steel products. And these are getting very costly for companies. So companies are going to need to really work on their documentation. And there may be limitations by their ERP system. So they're going to have to provide that information to the broker separately to get that enough information to properly enter these goods and not overpay duties.
Yeah. So I just added to the chat the link for Customs website to sign up for the CSMS messages. I think if you are exporting currently, it's important that you sign up for those and you can get that information firsthand on that. But right now, what Customs is looking at, what I'm seeing fines and penalties in, is valuation, its country of origin, and a tariff classification. Those are the top three. A lot of companies are going, hey, I bought it in the United States, I'm returning it to the United States, it's U.S. goods returned. That's not necessarily true. Or I purchased it from a Canadian supplier, it's Canada, qualifies for GUSMA. That's not necessarily true. And right now, with the tariffs, everybody's trying to adjust what value they put on the product. So first sale rule is something that I saw in a news article that you should apply for first sale rule. It's very specific, the terminology of that regulation, and it's not a loophole. It's compliance, and it's a regulation that you could follow. But most companies do not qualify for first sale rule. It's a very specific process, and then they try and use the value from their manufacturer as their import price and their paperwork to the United States. There's very specific regulations and a hierarchy of how to qualify your value for customs purposes in the United States, and it starts with transaction value. So we really have to be careful, and that's the top that I'm seeing mistakes is valuation, classification, and country of origin.
Okay, thank you both.
You're welcome. Anytime.
We're now going to hear from Brian Barber, who I said is president of the Northern Border Customs Brokers Association and vice president for U.S. brokerage and government affairs at Wilson International, which is a binational broker. And he has a very interesting perspective given his dual roles. So Brian, can you please share your perspective and your insight on our Can-Am border?
Sure.
What do you see?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just what are you seeing?
Sure. So absolutely. So I'm going to try to land the plane here with some overarching comments, just state of affairs where things are. Probably queue up a few things that both Jim and Damon talked about, but I really want to hit on the fact that, as we've discussed today, Canada and the U.S. have long enjoyed a stable trading relationship, codified in what we've talked about. A lot of USMCA, previously NAFTA. My background personally spans more than 20 years, and I'll sit here before you today and tell you without hesitation that this is the most challenging trade moment I've ever seen. Many of us are familiar with ACE on the Canadian side, the recent CARM transformation. Perhaps we've had a difficult partner government agency rollout, but the pace and uncertainty of current changes right now, it's staggering, it's unrivaled from anything that I've seen in the past. And it remains unclear to at least me at this point what the actual goal of the tariffs are, right? Is it to perfect trade imbalances? Is it to grow and protect U.S. manufacturing and exports? Is it to raise funds to support the administration's tax cutting agenda? Or perhaps, and I say this tongue in cheek, perhaps it's just simply chaos. For decades, Canada and the U.S., it symbolized one of the most stable and integrated economic partnerships. And in 2024, bilateral trade between our two countries surpassed $760 billion, making Canada the United States' second largest trading partner, right behind Mexico, with Laredo now being the largest port of entry, and ahead of China. But in 2025, we've seen that one stable relationship being tested like never before. And I was talking to a colleague of mine recently, and he referred to our current state of flux as constructive tension. And that kind of resonated with me a little bit. And, his thought process was, that ultimately the anguish and anxiety is going to subside and a deal is going to be reached that makes sense for both of our countries. And, right now, I think it's very hard to see the constructive part, and it's really easy to hyper focus on the tension portion. So as we discussed today, the most significant disruption this year has been the resurgence of protectionist policies under the second Trump administration. And we've seen sweeping tariffs that have reintroduced a wide range on Canadian goods, reigniting trade tensions that many of us hoped were behind us. And in response, Canada, of course, has imposed $30 billion in retaliatory tariffs, targeting U.S. exports, alcohol, appliances, food products. And I've seen actually provinces like Ontario and BC go even further and remove products from shelves. So the economic impact of all this can't go unnoticed. It's very severe, and it's swift. Steel and aluminum has been talked about quite a bit today, and we're seeing steel and aluminum producers reporting layoffs, declining orders, and quickly what we're seeing, at least on the brokerage side for me within my company, derivative requirements, the additional 50% tariffs, those effects are settling in very quickly. We're seeing the automotive sector being hit by this. They're facing rising costs, supply chain disruptions. We're seeing agriculture being affected, both directly by tariffs on goods and indirectly through increased input costs. And I saw a recent article citing the Canadian Chamber of Commerce that indicated these measures could shrink Canada's GDP by up to 2.6%, costing the average household several $1,000s annually. And honestly, that figure might be low. So as I look ahead, there's been a lot of talk about USMCA. 2026 is the review period. Potentially, you could see that accelerated depending on whether or not the Trump administration pushes to sort of renegotiate. But I think it's a pivotal moment. It's not just a procedural check-in as maybe it's been in the past. It's a chance for our countries to modernize digital trade rules. So in the past, we've talked a lot about blockchain. Now we're hearing more distributive ledger technology, which is a more generic term for it. We can look to strengthen dispute resolution mechanisms, enhance our labor and our labor and environmental standards, and also coordinate on critical minerals and energy policies. But right now, as we know, with the tension, our trust is fragile, and the Trump administration's unilateral decisions have raised concerns that this review could actually become a battleground instead of a bridge. So when I look at the political landscape, trade tensions have also reshaped domestic policies. Kind of watching what's happening in Canada right now. We saw Prime Minister Carney's party win on a platform of economic sovereignty, retaliatory tariffs, and trade diversification. And I think that's really important to notice because from my perspective, I'm watching how this impacts sort of the North American strength. I think you're seeing now potentially, Canada looking for options to diversify trade routes towards Europe and Asia, strengthening the interprovincial trade, and investing in, like the U.S. is investing in domestic manufacturing and infrastructure. I don't think these are defensive moves. I think they're strategic steps towards long-term economic independence, and that does sort of speak against the robust trade relationship our countries have enjoyed throughout these at least past 30 years, from USMCA and the predecessor NAFTA. So despite current tensions, I still think there's a shared interest in restoring stability. Canada and the US are deeply intertwined, not just economically, but culturally, geographically, and strategically. And as I said before, USMCA review could be a turning point. I think if it's approached constructively, it could reinforce North America's competitiveness in a world increasingly fractured by geopolitical sectors and technological rivalry. But I think that's going to take political will, I think mutual respect, and a commitment to fair and rules-based trade. So for closing thoughts, and to kind of get back to landing the plane here, I think in today's environment, you have to recognize that what you put on your paperwork today matters more than ever before. As customs brokers, we often see pitfalls, right? We see vague terms or terminology. For example, something is not a sale. Well, what does that mean, right? Is it a repair? Is it a sample? Could it be a temporary import? Are you taking allowable deductions, right? We talked a little bit about valuation. Those are pitfalls. People are looking to reduce, obligations to tariffs, and you have to be very specific about it. I think either Jim or Damon was talking about if you change your classification, CBP is going to target that. Like, they're using algorithms and AI to feed CBP. They're getting smarter about how they validate and how they enforce. And I think as traders, as importers, as brokers, we need to be cognizant of that. Are you confident in your tariff classifications? That was talked about heavily today. USMCA eligibility. Are you able to substantiate those claims? That's going to fall with the importer of record, right? I would say continue fostering transparency with your trade partners, right? Whether it's your customs broker, your trade consultant, your potentially attorneys. The best advice, Damon kind of hit on it, right? A tariff classification that's done under duress of a shipment crossing the border, that's done in 5 minutes, isn't always going to be the best answer. So the best advice and strategy is going to always come from a full understanding of your model with detailed knowledge of the product or the situation. And I think it's important to note, going back to the enforcement component, the ports and the centers of excellence and expertise at CBP right now, they're being empowered by the administration, and they're being empowered to enforce laws and protect revenue. And we're not talking as much as we previously have about facilitation. I kind of make the joke that facilitation is like the lost F word right now as we're working with CBP. And I think but there's opportunities, right? So I don't want to end on doom and gloom, right? There's opportunities here to tighten up compliance, to work with partners, to reduce your risk. I think clarity and precision are critical. Like I said, what you put in your paperwork now matters more now than it did 2 years ago. Protect yourself, right? Make sure that you are working with trusted partners in a volatile trade landscape. And I'll say this, we all know that the Can-Am border is more than just a line on a map. If you're sitting here, it's a lifeline for millions of workers, businesses, and communities. Navigating today's challenges will require more than just policy tweaks. And I think it demands a renewed vision and commitment for what the partnership between our two countries can be throughout the 21st century. And I'll end on that. And I'll just say thanks again for the opportunity to be here with you all today. And I think I'm just over time by 1 minute. So I'll turn back to Linda and say, I'll let you close any housekeeping and to wrap things up. So thanks again.
Well, thank you, Brian. And I want to thank our speakers who live and breathe the Can-Am trade relationship every day. And I'm very fortunate to be able to work with all of you for Canadian client questions. We have hundreds of people on the line today for this webinar and only 1 hour, so it wasn't possible to answer individual questions, but I want to echo Kurt's point that we work with individual companies. If you have questions, my email's in the chat. As a trade commissioner, I help exporters with border navigation and connections to experts. For our audience, please know the Trade Commissioner Service is a valuable resource to assist you on your export journey. The U.S. and Canada trade relationship remains strong, and our program is concluded. Thank you.